Good morning, Graham students. This is Mr. Sayre, and I hope you're having a terrific Tuesday. Today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Aztecs and how they began and how they ended. Your daily question is kind of an odd one today. It's number 17, and the question is, what is invisible that you wish people could see? Kind of interesting. The content objectives is today's students will be able to identify and describe reasons why the Aztec cultures were established and fell. And second is today's students will be able to answer and explain the main reasons why the Aztec culture began and ended. And you're going to be getting that information from this slideshow and from an Edpuzzle video that you'll watch. So let's set this up. The Aztecs' rise and fall. So the origins of the Aztecs. So we're going to watch this video together. So check it out.
After a 200-year odyssey, the Aztecs reached the Valley of Mexico. There, at the hands of a neighboring tribe, they suffered a humiliating defeat. They were forced to retreat to the swamps of a tiny island in a vast lake. It was here that their priestly oracles commanded them to search for an eagle perched upon a cactus. This sign, they said, would mark the end of their quest for a homeland. At dawn, they glimpsed a mighty eagle upon a prickly pear cactus. They named the spot Tenochtitlan. Finally, after 200 years, their journey had ended.
So, as we can see, the Aztecs were originally called the Mexica. And they took a journey, and they followed their god Huitzilopochtli's sign that they were looking for an eagle perched on a cactus eating a snake. It took them 200 years before they finally found the sign. And along the way, they faced lots of hardships, such as stuff that they were eating. They were surviving on things like eggs and larvae from snakes and from animals, and then their critics criticized them and called them dog people, which they probably remembered. And so finally they found this sign, and the sign was found on an island called in an island in the center of Lake Texcoco. And so here it is, you can see it, and in that island it was really hard to get across. So what they did was they built some causeways. And these causeways were basically raised roads. And you can see where they built these causeways, which were very smart because it allowed them to be able to travel across them. But if their enemies were coming across them, then they would have parts of it that was made out of wood. They would just burn it, and it would make it very difficult for somebody to cross and attack them. Now the other thing is that we know about these because we saw in their books, or another thing for their books are called codex, and they're glyphs. And you can see the little glyphs here. These are little symbols, and this is their codex, their book. And right here you can see all kinds of canals, and in the center was the sign, and that sign now is found on the Mexican flag. And you can also see that these people are farmers, and there were also fighters down here. And so survival came through farming, and they learned how to farm from the people around them, and they also learned how to fight from the people around them, and they were part of a triple alliance. But later what happened was they got strong enough that they started to go out on their own. But before that, they just started to build up and make many advances in terms of class structure and marriage and family life, all kinds of different foods and how they produced foods, their markets, religious practices, and recreation. And so here's how they converted this swampy, rejected island that nobody wanted. What they did was they pounded into the ground stakes, and then they filled it up with wood in the center, and they called them chinampas, or floating gardens. And then they would grow things in the middle, and they would use this thatch work so that they didn't have to worry about weeding. And I don't know about you, but weeding and watering can be kind of a pain when you're gardening. So they just had amazing gardens that produced lots and lots of food. And so the other thing they had was, what did they produce? And some of the foods they produced, nobody knew about in the world. And so they had all kinds of things like tomatoes and peppers and vanilla. And they also had things like corn and cactus and avocados and potatoes and tomatillas, or green tomatoes, all kinds of beans and peanuts. They had lots of different types of foods that, I don't know about you, but I really like. And you see a lot of this in Mexican food today. They also were really good with maize or corn, and they would make tortillas. They would grind them. They would catch fish. They would do weaving. We talked about marriage, or I talked about marriage, and you get expressions, some things like tie the knot, where that was a symbol, just like we wear rings now, but that was a symbol of tying the knot between these two. They also had all kinds of different games. Now, they definitely became advanced people. But in addition to becoming advanced people, they also turned from a small band to a large empire. So in the early 1500s, they became an empire, which, as we've talked about before, they conquered other nations. Now, they were very smart. They knew that they couldn't do all the work by themselves. So they, like the Romans, decided that they would let people have some freedom as long as they would pop. You remember that. Peace, obey, and pay. And what would happen is that that's where you see these holes in their empire. They allowed these people to be, quote unquote, free or independent as long as they did the pay, obey, and peace. However, they were pretty brutal on their people. They demanded high tribute. And what I mean by that is that the people had to pay. And so the people would come and pay and bow before the leaders of the Aztecs. And the Aztecs would keep track of, did they pay enough? And what would they pay? They would pay with all kinds of things like foods and feathers and stuff that they had grown. They were also slaves. And so some people would have to become slaves in their family. And if they didn't get enough slaves, then they wouldn't be accepted. They would also sacrifice some of the people. What they would do is they would stretch them across a rock and cut out their heart and rip it out while it was still beating. And this was one of the flint knives that they jabbed underneath the rib cage. Why would they do this? Why would they want to sacrifice people? Well, one of the reasons they would is because they believed that the sun and the moon fought every night, and whoever won would rise. And so what would happen is that if the sun won, then it would rise the next day, and they needed the sun because they were farmers. And in addition, not only did they have to have the sun rise, the sun had to be strong enough. So they believed that they would offer the sun human blood to drink. And so what would happen is they would have them come to the top of the temple. And when the great temple here was created, it was such a big deal, they actually sacrificed 60,000 people. And at the top, there are two temples, the rain temple and the sun temple. So the god of rain was called Tlaloc, and the god of sun and war was called Huitzilopochtli. And So here is a closer version, which is illustrated, and you can see at the top all these white dots. Those were actually human skulls from sacrificed people that they had to honor their gods. And then this was the Sun Temple. Now, all this stuff was happening, and at the same time, remember the age of exploration, there was a guy named Hernan Cortez. He was getting ready to go, and at the same time, they believed in astronomy like the Mayans, and they saw this comet, and the comet they had predicted, their priests had predicted, that they would have a white god called Quetzalcoatl wearing shiny garments, and he would come, and he would be a god that would bless them. So what happened was they would have different versions of what it was gonna look like, and here were the first meeting. Here was an example of the first meeting when they met Hernan Cortez. They treated him like a god. That made it easier for them to be conquered. And so Hernan Cortez did conquer them, and when he conquered them, basically he took them over, and then over time they became Mexico. Now the other thing is, when they broke free and became Mexico, they were ruled by Spain for a while. You will, after this, go back to, and this is, I guess, number 18 or number 19, and you're going to do an Ed puzzle on the fall of the Aztecs and why they fell. So I hope you have a great day. If you have any questions, please send me an email. Thank you.